Hi, this is Brian Kim, and I'd like to share with you in more detail my foot pedal modulation for aspiration and vacuum during my cortical cleanup technique. So the side-to-side sweeping technique is a low aspiration flow rate technique to loosen the cortex from the posterior capsule. And you want to, and this is very important because you're not actually going to remove the cortex from the eye. You're just simply liberating the cortex and disassociating the cortex from the posterior capsule. You capture the cortex on one side and slowly increase aspiration with linear foot pedal control, and you want that vacuum to rise so that it grips the material, and you want to find that right balance of gripping the material without removing it from the eye. You want to maintain your foot position and sweep to the other side of the fan or the other part of the cortex you want to remove, and you now have gripped cortex from both sides with the INA handpiece under low aspiration and vacuum. And as you sweep side to side, you are mechanically stripping the cortex from the posterior capsule. You're using your movements with your hands to liberate and disassociate the cortex from the posterior capsule, not through aspiration and not through vacuum. Remember, you're only using high aspiration and vacuum when you're ready to remove the material from the eye. The mistake that some people make is they use high aspiration and vacuum during the stripping part, and that's when you can catch the posterior capsule and cause a tear. With this technique, there's virtually no risk of tearing the posterior capsule because you're only using very low aspiration and vacuum and using that swiping movement to grab the material. And you'll see that you'll have some occlusion signals during this overlay here. And so as you see, I'm going sub-incisionally. Again, the aspiration is very low. Vacuum is also very low at 85. I'm going to start my side-to-side movement and sweeping. And as you do that, you still see that the numbers are still fairly low. And now, when I'm ready to, the vacuum is high, I'm actually moving the tip centrally to actually tease and disassociate the cortex from the PC, and then I initiate the vacuum. But that initial movement is all mechanical. I go on the other side sub-incisionally, and you see my aspiration numbers are still fairly low, but when I'm ready to remove the material from the eye, I increase my aspiration and vacuum. Now I'm going to attack the cortex in front of me. I'm starting on the right side. You see my aspiration numbers are fairly low. Vacuum is also around 100. And as I approach the left side of that quadrant, I'm not even using any aspiration. It's just vacuum. And I grabbed that part of the cortex and I moved it side to side and centrally. And now here I'm ready to remove the cortex from the eye, and as you see, my aspiration and vacuum numbers are much higher, and when this happens, boom, the material leaves the eye. This is another example. I'm going sub-incisionally. Again, my aspiration numbers are really low, vacuum's also fairly low. I'm making my swiping side-to-side movement, and as I'm increasing my vacuum, I'm pulling that material centrally, and when I'm ready to remove the material, I increase my aspiration and vacuum, and the material leaves the eye. And again, just to reiterate, I'm only going on high aspiration vacuum when I'm ready to remove the material from the eye. In this example, you see there's a very large quadrant of cortex. I'm going to attack the right side of that material first, and then I'm going to sweep to the other side. So again, I'm going to attack on the right side. Look at my aspiration and vacuum are extremely low numbers. I swipe to the left side to grab the other end of that big quadrant of cortex. And then I sweep to the center. Again, look at my numbers are so low. My aspiration rates was barely double digits and my vacuum was around 100. And now when I'm ready to remove the material from the eye, my aspiration rate's much higher, vacuum is much higher, and then suddenly the material leaves. This is, again, same thing. Aspiration low, vacuum low. When I'm ready to remove it, it all comes out. So again, the side-to-swipe movement is a mechanical movement to disassociate the cortex from the posterior capsule. You're using low aspiration and low vacuum, and doing that swiping movement, there is very little risk to the posterior capsule because you're not using any high vacuum or high aspiration. And because of this, I feel this is a much safer and efficient approach. I hope this explanation helps you. Thank you for your attention.